How do we as leaders move towards like a true feedback loop with the frontline workforce?
The math just maths, like we need these people, we need more of them, and then we need them to be working to a very high standard.
What's realistic for AI today versus what's hype, and what should leaders start experimenting with now when it comes to AI?
A lot of these jobs are not jobs that are going to be replaced by robots. The math just maths, like we need these people, we need more of them, and then we need them to be working to a very high standard.
How do you see the role of communication professionals changing in the next 5 years? Victoria, it is such a pleasure to have you back on Transform Your Workplace. What is this, like 4 times or 5 times?
I think so. I think this is the 4th. Maybe, yeah, definitely not the 3rd, more than the 3rd. Probably not the 5th, but I'm so thrilled to be back with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. It's always meaningful to check in when you've done a bunch of new research, and you're out with a new report. It's called Connecting the Frontline, Current Trends, Challenges, and Strategic Opportunities in Workforce Communication. First of all, when you set out to build this report, what voices did you capture in the report, and what did you think you were setting out to accomplish with this?
One of the things that's become really clear is that the demographics around workforce participation, especially in the front line, so that can be, we talked to folks from about 18 industries, so everything from manufacturing to healthcare to education, different nonprofits, construction, food and beverage. And one of the things that's clear is that the demographics and the demand for these skilled trades is so important. Obviously, I come from a communications background and with a focus on internal communications. And so we wanted to talk to communication leaders, people who are working in these organizations and leading the communication functions that are tasked with connecting with the frontline workforce or deskless workforce. And this has always been kind of such a hard audience. These are always been such hard audiences to connect with, because very often, of course, they're swinging a hammer, or they're on site and they're not necessarily sitting at their desk looking at the internet or on Slack or responding to emails. So they've always been a little out of sight, out of mind. But what is clear is that there's such a tipping point in terms of how important it really is to connect with them meaningfully.
You wrote that those frontline workers comprise about 80% of the world's workforce, and they're, like you said, they're overlooked when it comes to communication strategies with this group overall. Why do you think we, whether it's leaders or managers, we miss that mark on communicating with the frontline workers effectively?
I thought about this so much, and I think it's because it's a little out of sight, out of mind, as I mentioned, and because, if we go back to the pre-pandemic days, and there was this idea of kind of, you take a paycheck, right? And so you have to show up and do what you're told. And we know that has changed. And I think that also there's been this idea that if, for example, take construction or something, that people are kind of clocking in and clocking out, right? And they're there for the paycheck, and then they want to go home and be left alone. I think what we've learned in the last bunch of years is that people's relationship with work is a lot more nuanced. Almost everyone wants to find some meaning in their work. And so I think we've had these sort of outmoded ideas about frontline workers, what's important to them, the kind of connection that they want to have to the organizations that employ them. And by the way, we use frontline workforce because not every member of a frontline workforce will be an actual employee, and we want to make sure that we represent that. So I think it's been that they've always sort of fallen in the too hard basket, and that worked well enough for a long time. But like so many things, when we look at the future of work, it doesn't work that well anymore. And so we're at a really wonderful tipping point, I think, to embrace the opportunity of connecting with them better.
The last time you and I connected, I think it was a year or so into the pandemic. And I think communication strategies completely changed for many organizations. Do you think, now that you've done this research a few years later, have we learned anything from how we communicated before? And are we getting better or worse? The same?
I think some things are getting better. Some things are not getting better. And I think it's a sort of interesting. Sometimes it feels like a few steps forward, a few steps back. We could look at some of the conversations we're having around return to office, and there's it's nothing. Nothing's ever just one way, is it? Right? like different organizations approach things in different ways with different leaders. And we're always looking at trends. But one of the things that I think is fascinating for us anyway, in my work at Dewpoint Communications, working with different clients, is there's no one way that people are doing things. And in this research, we see just a huge range of either creative solutions, ways that people are finding workarounds, or strategies that people are employing to connect with frontline workers. Things that work in one organization might not work in another, in one industry might not work in another, and or there may be things that are working in another industry that you might not have any idea about, but that you think, oh, there's a kernel of that we could totally use and adapt for our context. So it's a lot of sharing knowledge and information so that we can take different seeds to get really creative and innovative.
One leader told you, quote, "We have a Ferrari on the salaried side and a horse and carriage on the hourly side." What did that leader mean by that, and where do you see this gap playing out?
I think it's kind of around some of the things we've been talking about, that in the salaried side, or those we might think of as corporate desk workers. They might have an internet or a really great digital employee experience platform. They have access to technology. They have they're more easily accessible to leaders. Their managers are with them perhaps more of the day, and just the technology makes things easier. Versus you have people who may be working on shifts, and they may have be working in rural or remote areas. They're very far from headquarters. They may be far even from their managers or supervisors. They may be doing jobs every day that don't mean they're kind of they're not sitting in meetings a lot of the day, right? They may be out with a crew or out working with coworkers, but they're really doing the task at hand, a job that they're being paid to do, not talk about how we're doing the job that we're being paid to do. And so I think that the tools and technology for a lot of the workforce have really been geared towards people who are desk-based, and less so for non-desk workers. One of the cool things is that's changing. There are so many different platforms and incredible tools that are available for non-desk-based workers now. One of the typical sort of roadblocks has always been, well, they don't have email addresses. They don't have laptops. We can't necessarily use their personal phones or their personal numbers, right? So there've been all these sort of reasons why they were too hard to reach. But one of the things I've seen in this research and having conversations with really incredible platform providers in this space is there's lots of cool workarounds that are designed to work for different organizations, different industries with different workforce needs.
There's a frightening stat that came up in your research that said that 72% of frontline workers don't understand company strategy. I imagine this could be pretty challenging, especially when these workers might be in the field and doing the task at hand. How do we effectively, as leaders, show that strategy, communicate that strategy without like disrupting what their day-to-day work is like? Because I imagine it's a little bit harder to communicate strategy, and clearly they don't understand it.
There's so many layers in that question, Brandon. So the first one is, I think traditionally we may have understood or had this perception that well, they don't need to know the strategy. They just need to come and do their job and go home, right? And we see that that's not true. That now, especially, one of the words that came up again and again and again and again in the interviews that we did in this research was business transformation. Every business pretty much in the world is going through massive transformation right now. And traditionally, frontline workers may have been seen as implementers. So we have a new strategy and we need you to go and implement it and do the things that we tell you are in the strategy so that we can meet the strategic goals. And this shift to, like, often if you think about it, frontline workers, they know your supply chains better. They know the equipment better. They often know different parts of the business better than, even the C-suite. They know each other better. They have a whole lens on the context of the business that is not as visible to folks who sit at a desk. So first, I think the question about do they need to understand strategy? They need to understand strategy that is in a way that is important, meaningful for them, and honors their incredible, that they are knowledge workers, and how they interact with the strategy, right? So, and that may be different in different organizations and for different kinds of workforce. So how do we do it? It's the same as any communication challenge. I think it's right message, right time, right person, right place. And again and again and again, which is not the same as over communicating, but making sure that, one of the things I think I want a t-shirt and it would say context and meaning, because if I think about the work really of internal communication professionals, it's to create context and meaning for the people that we trust to run our business every day. So that's never just going to be like sending a memo or doing a CEO video or telling people about a strategy at a town hall. Because if you think about it, information, and, we call it like disseminating or cascading or transmitting information is really about creating behavior change. It doesn't matter if a message has been received. If the person is not able to understand it, interpret it for their context and take desired action, right? So communicating strategy is just so much more complex and nuanced than telling people about the strategy. So to go back to the first thing you mentioned about the 72% of people that don't understand the strategy, I think that is one of the most staggering statistics because it shows that we just have a lot of work to do to make strategy meaningful and relevant in a way that helps them to engage with it.
Managers are described as the linchpin in timely, relevant communication. But managers are also super overwhelmed and fighting fires and just a lot is on their shoulders. How do we take care of the managers so that they can succeed in the role that they need to be doing from a communication standpoint?
This is the question. First, I think I always say managers are people too. And from a communications perspective, sometimes we see managers as a communication channel, right? And they are because they are the people that their teams trust. They want the information, again, contextualized and localized in a way that's meaningful and relevant to them. So they often want to hear information about how to do their job in the day-to-day or what changes in the organization mean for them. They do want to hear that from their manager, their supervisor. So they're super powerful communication channels. And I guess most people, when they become a manager, don't sign up like in their job description. They're not looking for something that says like, be a communication channel, right? So how do we support them? And that again is different in every context. Because we do keep just loading more and more on to managers. And we also see, this flattening of the manager level. And especially, I think this is especially sort of pervasive in tech these days and some other industries, right, where we're looking at reducing that manager layer. And so again, the report asks this really big question, and I don't have all the answers about how do we address this manager overload? How do we support them? How do we create a really meaningful cadre of leaders, of people leaders, or leaders of people? Sometimes when I say people leaders, I think it sounds like people eaters. So I always try to correct it with leaders of people. So how do we give them the tools, resources, time, and care and support that they need to actually be able to lead their people? There's another thing too, is that sometimes people become managers not because they want to lead people, but because they have a lot of subject matter expertise, and organizations have to account for that as well.
The report points out that many communication teams still rely on one-way channels and can't really measure whether their messages are landing with the people that they're trying to communicate with. So, how do we as leaders move towards like a true feedback loop with the frontline workforce?
It is tricky because often there are analog channels, right? Like bulletin boards, memos, things like that, which are totally fine and appropriate in a lot of contexts work. I think it's not analog or digital. It's a balance of both that we want to look to strike. And again, right message, right person, right place, right time. And but in terms of creating that feedback loop, it's kind of old school, and this is a theme that comes up in the report a lot, and it's called listening. One of the things is that how do we really listen to not just telling, people think that communications and especially internal communications is sending emails or sending a newsletter or doing a town hall and telling people stuff. And I think we're really at this exciting place where it's starting to become more and more understood that communication is two-way. We communicate with people, not to people. And that means that we listen. We understand how those messages, how the information is being received, interpreted. We take feedback. We have a place where people can ask genuine questions, and where they can innovate with us and say, actually, it's like this. It's not like this. When this thing happened with the supply chain or that piece of equipment, it wasn't because this thing that you think, it was because of this. And then this person did this, and that's how we got here, right? So really making sure that we leverage the expertise of those knowledge workers.
That's so well said, because I think oftentimes we're thinking, when we think of communication, we're thinking, how do we communicate out our vision, our strategy, whatever, to our people? But we're missing something if we don't open up that communication the other way. So surveying our people, whether it's like pulse checks, exit interviews when people are exiting, just to gain information, excuse me, that we can act on eventually. That is a great strategy in itself, is to just listen, to your point.
And there's smaller things too that can be done, small listening circles, small, whenever you can get executives out in the field, right, to do those small group listening tours. Those are really powerful. Giving people time with their managers or with other leaders to talk about what's top of mind for them. Skip levels, toolbox talks, right? Things where we have a chance to really, most people are verbal processors. Have you ever noticed that? And so whenever we give people a chance to talk, and talk about what's top of mind for them, what's working and not working, it is really powerful. It's hard to scale, isn't it? In a lot of ways. Surveys are a way to scale it. I think we heard this, that sometimes people are kind of, and they know this, are doing an annual engagement survey, which is hard because it's really retrospective and it's a blunt instrument. So looking at ways that we can get more nuanced feedback. Certainly there's digital channels and digital platforms that have the opportunity to do more listening and for people to offer more feedback. But again, there's no one size fits all. And some of it is that balance of analog, old school listening and connecting with people. And how can we have tech enabled listening as well?
One of the things we did at Xenium over the last year was, because we do a lot of surveys, one of the things we felt like we were missing is an anonymous channel where people can ask questions or provide a suggestion without fear of just embarrassment or maybe it being a stupid suggestion or something like that. And it's amazing how many people actually use it. And there's a lot of good notes in there about, something we can improve upon or something we can do as leaders and managers. It's really effective. Now, it's a digital communication channel. So I wonder how you do something like that for a frontline worker that may not have the tech. I mean, any suggestions for something like that?
It's interesting, the question about the tech. And it's like, on one hand, I would say, frontline workers don't have tech. Well, except that when they get to the break room, they, like all of us, are scrolling on their phones, right? So they do have the tech. It is not necessarily always accessible to employers, right? And certainly there's often union regulations about how you can communicate with people outside of work hours, and there are lots of restrictions and things that will and will not work. But creating those channels and the feedback loops, and I think there's a lot of tech solutions where people can offer that two-way communication. And it is powerful. People want to be listened to. They want to feel like their voice is heard, like what they have to say matters. And I think that is just that's a human thing. We want to feel like what we have to say matters, especially when we know that we have a lot of expertise in an area that may not always be recognized by the people who sit in an office building and sit at desks all day.
I noticed the section on AI where you suggest it can be a game changer in frontline communication, but we're just not there yet. What's realistic for AI today versus what's hype, and what should leaders start experimenting with now when it comes to AI?
One of the things that we heard was that people are starting to use it, and this is pretty consistent what we see in other research about how communication professionals are using AI. A very strong interest and good adoption in creating content. We even heard about using some to create chatbots and some work in personas. We did not see this sort of shift to agentic AI, right? So there was this interesting tension that on one hand, people said that they felt stuck because they were really busy kind of creating content. It was really hard to customize content for so many different diverse frontline audiences. And they felt like there was so much doing that when it came to spending time on the front lines, talking to people, that they just didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to do that because creating the communications took up so much time, which is really reasonable. And if you kind of skip a couple steps ahead and you see that there is this time when AI agents will, and I don't mind whether it's in 6 weeks or, 6 months or a year, will create a lot of the content, customize it, find the right channel, refine it, iterate it, measure it, monitor it, right? And we'll be able to do all of those things a lot better and faster than humans. That in an ideal world opens up opportunities for those teams to be out there talking to people, having more conversations, working more cross-functionally with their counterparts in HR, tech, operations, the C-suite, that they have the opportunity to connect the dots and really spend more time thinking critically, being systems thinkers, thinking strategically about how all the pieces are fitting together. One of the things I found really interesting about this is if we are able to kind of fast forward ahead, we don't always have to know how to get there or be able to see exactly how the solution will play out with AI. But if we can start to imagine the kinds of roles or what we could do if we had these tools that we know are coming, then we would start to do org design a little differently. We would start to prioritize building skills in teams that people can so that people are able to spend more time thinking, analyzing, thinking critically, building those relationships, learning how to influence their peers and team members, and kind of doing some of those like sort of more human skills that support the content and the communication.
Yeah, I'm excited about the future where these tools will help us free us up to do more important things. And in one of the sections, you highlight that regular site visits can yield huge dividends. So being in person clearly makes a difference. It's very powerful in the age of digital everything, digital life and world that we're so accustomed to these days. So like, why does in-person matter so much in today's day and age?
I think we still really all crave that human connection. I think one person that we interviewed said it really powerfully, said, you have to get out there. When they said, we need to get out there and be on the front lines. And I said, what would you say if someone told you they didn't have time to do that? And they said, you have to. They're the front line. They're the people that you're trusting to run the business. They're literally out there like doing the things that make the business run. You don't have a choice to not go engage with them, understand and learn about what's top of mind for them, right? The other thing I think that's really powerful is that connection with frontline and customer experience. So if you're looking for the dollars and cents, if you're not out there listening to what, and you've taken a retail, a retailer, anything that's where those people are also customer facing, if you're not really prioritizing, talking to, listening, understanding what's top of mind for the people who are literally the face of your brand and are literally the people who are engaging with the people who pay money for the thing that you're selling. If you haven't really prioritized those people, then you've got a problem, because you also, and I think we talk about this in the report, frontline workforces as brand ambassadors are massively underutilized, because you've got these brand ambassadors, they're already sitting on your payroll, and yet they're not always activated and empowered to be sharing accurate, timely, compelling information about the products, about what it is you're selling, and about your organization with customers.
Yeah, in fact, you did highlight that was a looming risk. It was on page 55 of the report that companies just aren't leveraging their frontline workers as brand ambassadors. In a perfect world, how does this look like if done right?
Oh, that's a whole fun project. And I think in that section, there's looming risks and missed opportunities. I actually would put the brand ambassador piece as a missed opportunity. Oh. First of all, I think it comes back to the entire approach to communicating and engaging with the frontline workforce. we always use that example of a barbecue, right? What would someone say if they were asked about the company and the barbecue? Or if your company was in the news and someone goes to a barbecue and they say where they work and someone says, "Oh, I've heard," right? How would you want them to respond accurately, but to give a kind of fair and balanced perspective on what's happening, on things that are being done to resolve an issue? Or if there's a really new product or really exciting new product or a new way of working or a new offering coming out, that if they were asked about it at the barbecue, that person felt like they could share information that was really exciting to a consumer, right? Like, actually, next year, we're launching this thing that's going to make a big difference in the way that you experience it. We're not quite there yet, but it's coming. And I actually just had a briefing on this. I think it's going to be a game changer for the way you experience, these products. We want those people to have that kind of that insider expertise and to be able to share it with the marketplace.
The report stresses that solving the digital divide is mandatory, not a nice to have. Where do you see the biggest roadblocks, whether it's the tech itself, budgets, culture?
Yeah, I don't think it's the tech itself anymore. Honestly, I have conversations with really incredible platforms that are, many of them support different kinds of industries, right? But there's some really great tech solutions out there now. I think some of it is and this is one of the real things, my hopes for this report is that it shifts this thinking of this has to go from the too hard basket to the must-have basket. We talk about some of the demographics here that they're like the workforce participation is declining. We need these workers. A lot of these jobs are not jobs that are going to be replaced by robots. Right. So I love this area is the math just maths, like we need these people, we need more of them, and then we need them to be working to a very high standard. So we cannot pretend that the tech is just too hard or that we can't reach it. We have to solve for it. There are a lot of tech solutions that are there to do that. So I think part of it is committing the budget for it, right, and the investment. And that speaks to the second thing that you mentioned, which is that culture shift and that awareness and understanding that we don't have a choice but to solve for this anymore. The other thing that I really also love about this research is that it's, when we shift the front line from the too hard to the must-have basket, it actually unlocks a lot of the practices, things like listening, things like manager enablement, tech, the balance of tech and human-centric communication, right message, right channel, right place, right time, engagement, customer advocacy. Those are actually all true for desk-based workers as well. Mm-hmm. When you do the thing that has always been too hard, like cracking that frontline challenge, when you get that right, it's a force multiplier for everyone in the organization. So I really invite people to kind of flip that script and start doing the thing that's always been so hard, because it's going to make everything easier downstream.
I agree with you. Like the tech is totally there. There's so many amazing tools out there, but it is like, whether it's a budgetary issue or conversation, but the culture is probably the biggest shift. I've seen it personally. We implemented at Xenium a couple of years ago. I implemented a knowledge-based system for the organization. Like I was finding that people were spending too much time like searching through emails and the servers and just old conversations for information that they should really have at the tip of their fingertips. So we went to this centralized knowledge-based system called Guru, which is incredible. And the change management in that alone, that project was tough. And we're still like two years later, like having to change behaviors on this. So it is possible. And I'm sure there's tools like that can be accessible to frontline workers as well, because pretty much everybody has a smartphone nowadays. So I think that there should be no excuse other than getting a team together to make a culture shift.
It's hard, and some of it takes a long time, and that's one of the reasons why I love talking about this report. It's funny, my team member and I this morning, we were just talking about data, right? And one of the things in this report is we wanted to make sure there are plenty of stats. There's so much great stats and so much great research and data points out there, and we wanted to make sure that we wove a lot of those in. Not just the research that we did. We spent a lot of time doing interviews and really bringing a lot of qualitative data that's supported by some really excellent quantitative. I think people always say, well, we need to show them the data. When people see the data, then they'll change their mind or they'll understand it. I think that data and statistics and those points, they can be punctuation and they can help us make a case and help us tell a story. But in general, I find that people do make change when they are ready to, when they've made an emotional decision to do something, that it makes sense and the data supports it. But I know a lot of people that when you just show them a bunch of spreadsheets with numbers, they just suddenly, like, the penny drops and they decide to do something totally different. I think it's a process. It's one of the areas that we spend a lot of time training and working with communication teams on, because that's part of how we influence, and that more cross-functional collaboration and being better partners to different parts of the business and definitely the C-suite in helping them to understand what's going on around the business, helping them to connect the dots, helping to see things they may not have been aware of before, so that as they start to come to an understanding and a shared understanding of what the future might look like. And that's a really powerful place to be, and a great way to work as partners.
One of your strategic recommendations is to reimagine an AI-enabled comms team. How do you see the role of communication professionals changing in the next 5 years? I mean, maybe 5 years is too far in the future to imagine it, but because of AI, how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, 5 years is a long time, right? I see the role. I don't even know if in a few years we'll call communications, right?
Because everybody will have the tools to be able to communicate.
Well, I prefer to talk about communication professionals versus communicators, because everyone is a communicator. But communication professionals have a specific skill set around messaging channels, audience segmentation, etc. I think increasingly the people currently known as communication professionals will be business leaders who apply a communication skill set, tools to solving business problems. I think it will be a lot more around that, being the convener and forming those cross-functional working groups and really working across the business. One of the things I love about the field of internal comms is we're one of the few functions that works up, down, and across every part of the business, right? From the C-suite to the front line, across all different parts, corporate functions and areas of the business. So we really get to see, really good at connecting the dots and seeing the big picture and then the micro detail. So I think a lot of those skill sets around being really strategic thinkers and systems thinkers, and those analytical skills will become more important than ever, because a lot of the work of what has traditionally been the role of communications and other corporate functions of creating content or sending emails or whatever those things are that have never been particularly interesting to me. I've always loved the kind of bigger thinking pieces about how we create employee experience or workforce experience. Those we can see will be done by AI increasingly. It will be our job to really be the big brains, the big human brains that surround that and help to help hold that strategic vision and bring everyone along on that change journey.
At the end of the report, you say that smart, savvy communication leaders have their work cut out for them. So for those leaders who are listening right now, what is something they can do following this discussion that after listening to us, that they can better connect with their frontline?
Yeah. There's one of the things I like about this report is there's like a super clear, simple roadmap, right? One is first, because I think sometimes people feel stuck like with the tools they have, or feeling like there's budget constraints or they don't have the team for it. So the first thing I recommend is taking stock, looking at what you have, doing a good old-fashioned comms audit, look at what's working well now, and what's not working. And just being really pragmatic about where you're allocating resources and your team's time. And sometimes your people are a team of one. So just starting to be really smart about what you're doing and why. Part of that is because back to data, it helps you define and articulate where you want to go next. What is the vision? If you need new infrastructure or a new platform or more team or outside support, it starts to help you tell that story as well. and understand what will be the ROI on that. And I think the third thing is just really always prioritizing that human-centric connection, that listening. And, we all can get in our kind of little echo chambers. I think there's nothing more powerful than getting out the front line and talking to people to help us understand what we should really be focused on.
Victoria, it's been a pleasure having you back on the show. There's a lot in this report that we didn't cover. Can we put a link to the report? Is this going to be accessible to everybody, or how is the distribution going to happen for this report?
Yeah, people are very welcome to download it. They can go to dewpointcomms.com /resources and download the report there. And also, there's a lot of data in the report. But that we have even more stats. As you say, there's a lot in this report, and there's a lot we couldn't fit in the report. So we have, if anyone is looking for more data points and compelling stats that they can use as they start to tell the story of the importance of frontline communications to their leaders, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you a deck that has even more data points that may be useful to you.
Amazing. We'll put links in the show notes so people can access those and connect with you on LinkedIn. Victoria, it has been such a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much, Brandon.